This thing was like a handsome little guy. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't like nasty looking or evil. It was the cutest thing you've ever seen. Almost like if you see like a fawn deer running around its mother, like it's cute. Or if you see like a baby Siberian husky. My name is Miguel. I'm from Central Missouri. I run a channel called Sasquatch Theory, and today I'm going to be talking about Bigfoot encounters that took place in the Ozarks off the Merrimack River. My first experience took place when I was hunting in the forest on some private land, and I set up a black chair next to a cedar tree. I didn't see anything that day, and I was hunting in an area that's kind of a funnel zone. And I went home, woke up the next morning, there was zero rain, zero wind, and right next to my chair was the top of that cedar tree. What I found unusual was this cedar tree was probably about 6 or 8 inches in diameter, and it was freshly broken. And like I said, just a calm night. There was zero wind. So I pondered as to how that cedar tree broke. And it was so fresh that you could smell the cedar. And like I said, the top was sitting next to the chair, which was very unusual. And that was one of my first experiences. Moving on after that, a few years later, me and a friend, his name was Bruce, I was in high school, and we decided to go on a road trip after school, and we were going down a state highway. At this point, it was getting dark, and my friend saw a possum down the hill, and he decided to step on it, and we went from 55 miles an hour to about 80, and I'm thinking like, whoa, what's this guy doing? And right when we about hit the possum, this canine creature leaped out of the forest into the center of the highway, snatched up this possum, threw it up in its mouth, and shook it around like a rag doll and tore back off into the woods. But what was very unusual about this creature is it was about the size of a lion. It looked like a hyena or a German shepherd. It was a gray color, similar to a blue pit bull. And around its neck, it had a really long mane, kind of like, I don't know, almost like a tutu on a girl dancer. But it was just strange because of the size of the creature. It was so bulky, and I've never seen anything like it. At the time, I thought maybe this is some type of wild dog living out in the forest. But as soon as that happened, my friend slammed on the brakes and he said, "Whoa, did you see that?" I said, "Yeah, what was that?" And he's like, "I don't know." And we didn't know at the time what it was. Later on, after I had my Bigfoot encounters, I learned that there are things out there called hellhounds, dogman, and that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. I didn't really know too much about Bigfoot. I kind of thought it was a joke, but I was open-minded to the possibility of these creatures existing. But when you think of Bigfoot in Missouri, you generally think of the Pacific Northwest, Canada, Alaska. You wouldn't think that they would be in an area like this. The next serious experience that I had was me and an ex-girlfriend. We decided to go to the Merrimack River to go camping. It was probably around July. I'm not sure what year it was. I was in my mid-20s. And we set up camp. We were having a good time. There was a bunch of floaters going down the rivers just because during the summertime, a lot of city people like to come out here and go floating, but typically it's really quiet all year round. But we were just having a good time on the river. We were grilling some burgers, some hot dogs, and we enjoyed watching a show called Finding Bigfoot. We were really into the Bigfoot subject, and we just liked hearing people's encounters. We were kind of neutral on the subject. We didn't believe, but at the same time we did. She came from down south, which is really wooded, and she claims that her uncle shot at a Sasquatch. He followed the tracks in the snow for about 1.5 miles, 2 miles, and when he shot at the Sasquatch, it just turned around and screamed at him. So I was really intrigued, and she'd tell me stories from down south, and she said that they would see these balls of lights floating over the fields, and I just thought it was paranormal. I didn't really know what to think of it. And all the floaters are going by. We're talking about the show Finding Bigfoot because previously that week we heard a story from Willow Springs, Missouri, and a couple, they were talking to Matt Moneymaker about this juvenile Sasquatch that jumped out of a tree, or I think it fell out of a tree. But we were just out there on the river having fun talking about Bigfoot, and I looked at her and I said, "Do you really think these creatures exist?" She said, "I don't know. I think they might." So I went to my vehicle and I got a baseball bat out of the SUV and I did a really loud wood knock on a huge maple tree on the river bottom, and you could hear the knock echo all throughout the valley. We did that a few times, and then I did a few whoops, and her son, he started whooping too, which was kind of cute for a little kid. And as the floaters passed by, we heard this ginormous tree, and you can see the trees behind me. They're huge on the river bottoms. This huge tree just came crashing down. You can hear limbs cracking, snapping, and when that tree hit the ground, you could hear boom. I always compare that to Jurassic Park 3 when the T-Rex is fighting the other dinosaur and it bites it around the neck and slams it on the ground. It was equivalent to that. But we looked at each other, we were kind of shocked, surprised. We're like, what was that? That's kind of unusual, because again, there was zero wind. I mean, just a calm day, just like today. We didn't know what to think about that. And it started getting dark, and once it gets dark, all the floaters clear off because they get to the campgrounds and the river just goes quiet. There's no one out there. We were the only ones there. We had a fire going. She put her son to bed and we were sitting around the fire, and all of a sudden this thing behind us just screamed. And I mean, the scream lasted about 8 seconds. It was just this horrifying, monstrous sound. People often refer to it as like a woman being gutted or a woman being tortured. It was like that mixed with some type of unknown monster is the best way I can describe it. Just a but I mean it was so loud that you'd want to like cover your ears when you heard it. But immediately she looks at me and she said, grab your gun, grab your gun. And I had a Glock 19 sitting next to me, and I froze. I couldn't grab the gun. And in that moment, I knew that there was something out there that science can't explain. She kept saying, grab your gun, grab your gun. And I just had this little smirk on my face like the Grinch, because I knew right there in that moment that there was something out there that people call Sasquatch. But the reason I did not grab the pistol, something inside me told me, like my intuition said, if you grab that gun, whatever that is going to come into camp and tear you guys apart. So I was like, no, it's cool. I think whatever it is gone now. And we went to bed that night in the tent, and I fell asleep and woke up the next morning. I'm not sure if anything happened, but it was definitely unusual. And I live 5 minutes away from this location off of the Merrimack River, and it was probably about a month after that. I was on my back deck after work. I kept thinking about the river incident, the one I just told you guys about, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I mean, it just really stuck with me, and I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off there. So I did that same whoop off my back porch, just this loud whoop, and something came charging through the woods. It sounded like a bulldozer. I always describe it like somebody put like a Ford Ranger or an S10 pickup truck in neutral and let it roll down through the woods. And as this thing was moving through the woods, it was snapping and cracking all kinds of branches, but it did like a zigzag pattern all the way up to the edge of the yard, and it was right there in the wood line. And by this point, it's almost dark outside, and once it got right there at the edge of the woods, everything just got silent. So I was thinking, what the heck was that? And I went and got my ex too. I told her, I was like, come here, come here, come here. She heard it. She could hear this thing crashing, and it did. It sounded like an electric bulldozer. I don't think there is an electric bulldozer, but just without the sound of the engine, just something crashing through the forest. But the things that unfolded after that were extremely unusual. We would see these balls of light hovering around the house. Something would come up to the window and tap on the window, but you could hear the nails clicking on the window, like click, 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 click. And this happened about, I'd say anywhere from 3 to 5 times throughout a span of like 4 months. And I definitely felt like somebody was trespassing, watching us through the windows. So the last time that happened, I grabbed my pistol and I ran out there, and I did about like 3 laps around the house. There was no one out there, but it was unusual. there was a lot of paranormal activity in the house. We'd hear like a baby crying in the house, just a baby just crying, crying and crying, gasping for air. Like this infant needed its mother. And we were like looking underneath the bed, looking everywhere. And one of the times the baby started crying, we looked everywhere. And then I looked out the window, and it was snowing. It was dark outside, but it was one of those nights where you could still see outside because everything's white. And I saw this woman in a white dress walking off the side of the highway. And she asked me, she's like, "What do you see out the window?" I said, "Nothing." And I shut the blinds. I didn't want to tell her what I saw because I didn't want to freak her out. But later on, we split up, and I ended up moving out of that house. I moved to a different location further out in the country, and this is where the activity really began to intensify. I went into town one day, went to the grocery store, came back, and instead of driving all the way down the forested driveway and parking in the parking lot like I usually do, it hit me like, ooh, I got a trail camera in the woods. I'm gonna check it while I'm up here, which is unusual. I never stop at the top of the driveway. So I slammed on the brakes, got out, went to the trail camera and grabbed the SD card. And I'm standing there and I hear this loud whistle to my left coming down the forest road, just real loud human whistle. I don't know if you ever heard someone whistle where they put their fingers in their mouth, like that type of sharp whistle, like a cattle farmer calling in his dog or his cattle, something like that. Really loud, distinct, very human-like. And about 2 or 3 seconds later, directly in front of me, I hear another whistle. Except this whistle it had that high tone, but it also had a low tone to it at the same time. Like if somebody did that loud whistle into like a pumpkin, like it had like a high pitch and a low sound, which it was dual tone, which was very unusual. And about 2 or 3 seconds after that, another one whistled. So whatever it was, like triangulated around me. And I felt like I was being watched by trespassers and people that should not be in the woods. And something definitely felt off. Like I felt like I was being watched. And I couldn't shake the feeling. I went back home. I was thinking about the whistling incident, and it just did not sit right with me. I knew that somebody was in the woods. So it's almost dark, and I decided to walk all the way back up the driveway. Like I said, it's forest on both sides. It's at a dead-end road. And when I got up there, I saw these 2 balls of light about the size of a basketball floating about 3 or 4 feet off the ground, and there was 2 of them floating like this, real slow. And I was thinking, oh man, that's got to be people walking through the woods with like cell phones or lanterns. Who would have a lantern? Like we have LED lights now, like why would they have lanterns? It was definitely spooky. I got this hair-raising feeling like something was off. Something told me if you follow those lights, something bad is going to happen to you. So I just stood there, I watched them, and they went down the ridge. But the strange thing about them was, I don't know, like I said, they were like the size of a basketball, and they were super bright, but they didn't light up the area around them. They were just bright. I don't know how to explain that. But I walked back, and I was definitely spooked. And when I got halfway down the driveway, it was completely dark by this point, and then I heard a thump, just a loud boom. Like somebody picked up a big sandbag and dropped it on the ground, or equivalent to somebody picking up a big log and dropping it on the ground. It sounded like that. You could feel the vibration. And that happened to my left. And then I heard whoop, whoop, whoop. Something, it was definitely on all fours, and it was like charging at me, and then it just stopped. All the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I could feel the hairs on my hands standing up, and I said that was a messed up feeling. I didn't use that terminology, but we'll say that on camera. Anyways, I walked back, and I could not shake the feeling of what was going on in the forest, and I knew something unusual was happening. So I started doing research, and I came across Bigfoot. People were talking about Sasquatch and that they would whistle. There was a lady in the Himalayan mountains that claims she was abducted by a Sasquatch, and she passed out when this thing took her. When she woke up, she said it whistled at her. And I thought, oh man, that's weird. I heard whistles up the driveway. So I started investigating the property, trying to figure out what the heck was out there because I knew something was off. I would hear wood knocks and they were just super loud. I mean, definitely sounded like somebody took a baseball bat and hit a tree. I would find tree structures, and as I was investigating, I'd find like feathers in the center of the road, which at the time I was like, birds drop feathers, it's not really that big of a deal. But then I started finding them on my chair. They would leave little feathers, and when I would walk the driveway, at this point in time, I had like 3 herniated discs in my back, and it was very difficult for me to walk. I was pretty much bedridden. I couldn't work. Life kind of went downhill. So I'd always wear gym shorts. It was in the summertime, and I'd wear Crocs. It was just my lazy way of not having to tie my shoes, because when your back's out, doing something like driving a vehicle or tying your shoes is like extremely painful. But I'd always put my phone behind this old telephone post that was laying in the woods. And one day I went up to that telephone post where I'd set my phone at, and there was a mushroom just sitting there. And I just thought, man, that thing must have grew up there in that oak tree and fell like perfectly on that post. But I mean, I was still keeping in mind that, you know, it's not right. Something put that there. And I was foraging mushrooms. I was looking for them. This is kind of a long span of time. I'm just breaking down the experiences that I've had. This didn't happen back to back. It's not like everywhere I looked, I was having Bigfoot experiences. But anyways, I found some mushrooms in the woods. I wasn't sure if they were edible. And I went back to get my Missouri Conservation Mushroom book. And I set those mushrooms in the center of the trail. And I told myself, I'm gonna be back in 5 minutes. When I went back to that spot, the mushrooms were gone, and there was a giant set of keys just sitting there. And I knew that something was off in that area. Like, there's definitely people here. The tag said Oklahoma RV, which obviously I don't know if the keys came from Oklahoma, but it was definitely strange. When I walked back home, I heard something that vocalized like an orangutan, and it sounded like an elk chuckling. Just a really strange sound. I was just like, okay, what the heck was that? The more I went out there and tried to find answers, and the more I brought my handheld Panasonic camcorder, the less, I don't know, like things just quit happening. And I couldn't really explain that. So I figured, okay, whatever is around here is obviously gone. So one morning, it was probably about 9 or 10 a.m., I was out there foraging for chanterelle mushrooms, and I had a camouflage backpack, and I found a ton of mushrooms. I mean, they were growing all around the property, so I was super excited. And I thought to myself, if I go deeper in the woods, I guarantee like I'm gonna find more mushrooms. If there's this many just around the house, they gotta be like everywhere, especially deep in the forest. So the further I went into the woods, the less mushrooms I found. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go back to where I started, next to the house. I was finding mushrooms there. So I'm walking back down the driveway where I heard the whistle, seen the orbs, heard the thump, got whooped at. And I get halfway down that driveway, and I can start to see the parking lot. I can see my red Mustang, and I hear something to my left in the woods, just something rustling in the leaves. So I stopped and I looked. There's nothing there. So I took a few more steps, and then I heard like a small twig snap and something rustling in the leaves. When I looked, there was this black mass that was crouched down, and it stood up, and then it walked off, and it walked just like Patty from the Patterson Gimlin footage, except this thing was jet black. It was coal black, and it was probably about anywhere from 6.5 to 8 foot tall. I'm just guessing. I just stood there. I was frozen. I was in shock. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't excited. I was just completely shocked. And I always describe it like something took a vacuum and sucked out all my thoughts, because I was just locked down on this creature. And as it walked off, it would look over at me a few times, and it just had this evil look in its eyes, just like this menacing look. It didn't look kind. Whatever this thing was, it looked ancient, like really old looking, almost like you see the old Native American photos where their skin's like really wrinkly. It looked like that. This thing had a round head, almond-shaped eyes. They were jet black like a shark or like a Brahma bull. He was really bulky, and he wasn't shredded like Arnold, but I mean, he was pretty big. But you could just tell that he was really old. But he looked over at me about, I would say 3 times, probably to make sure that I wasn't going to shoot him in the back. But one thing I really noted was he had these white stripes going down his back, almost like a skunk, almost like a lemur. And he had two of them starting from his shoulder blade, and they ended right above his butt. But it almost looked like lightning bolts, like two of them, but they were like this silverish white color. But his hair was so black, and I'll never forget that. And another thing that I noted was as he walked on the forest floor, he didn't make a sound. It was dead silent. You could not hear any footsteps as he was walking. And when you walk in the Missouri forest, it's like walking on cornflakes. And he disappeared from he walked through the oaks and into the cedar trees and disappeared. And then I snapped back into reality. Like, I couldn't believe what I just encountered. I couldn't believe it. And I took off running down the driveway despite the fact that my back was out. Somehow with the adrenaline, the back pain was gone. And I just took off running, and I got to the driveway, and I was gonna try to cut this creature off. So I got back into the woods, I stepped over the barbed wire fence, and I just stood there, and the forest was dead quiet. And I stood there for about, I would say, 5 to 10 seconds, didn't hear anything, and then all of a sudden I started hearing like just this loud caveman sound. It sounded like a horse when it exhales. And I knew for sure it wasn't a white-tailed deer. You know, they will blow and they'll take off running. This was not a white-tailed deer. It sounded huge. You could tell it had big lungs. And I know it was the creature that I had just seen. For some reason, hearing that thing breathing really made it concrete. And I knew for sure what I had just encountered was a Sasquatch. But after hearing it, I was like, there's no way I'm gonna follow this thing into the woods. This thing's gonna kill me, make me disappear. And I got what I wanted. Like, I just had to confirm that I actually see that. So I walked back to my house and I was shaking my head. I couldn't believe what I had seen, and it blew my mind. That's what was crazy, was this thing was hanging out about 40 yards into the wood line outside of the yard. It's like, how are these things getting so close? How are they watching me without my knowledge? Like, how am I not aware of it? Obviously, I've had some experiences that I couldn't put my finger on, but once I saw that thing get up, walk away, like, it really terrified me. Another thing that I took note of was this thing immediately headed towards the creek, and they certainly follow the waterways because that's the exact direction it was going. Most people would never go into the woods again, but I was going through a really hard time. I went through a breakup. I lost my job, and I couldn't find a job. My back was out. I was just in a really bad point in my life. I mean, I was at rock bottom. So knowing that this thing exists kind of gave me a little bit of hope in life, that there's more out there than what we know, and science isn't telling us everything. But it helped me out because it really got the gears turning. Instead of thinking of all my problems, I kind of rewired my brain by thinking about Sasquatch constantly. And this is something that happens to people that have encounters and experiences. All they can think about is Bigfoot. And for some reason, that kind of healed me. I try to keep it balled up inside. Like, I told myself, I'm not going to tell anybody because they're going to think I'm crazy. But for some reason, the more I thought that, the more I found myself talking about Sasquatch to people. Like, hey, do you believe Bigfoot exists? And people would just look at me, you know, one eyebrow up, like, what are you talking about? But I started talking about my encounters on YouTube, and I just kind of laid it all out there in like a 3-part series. And all of a sudden, people started chiming in the comments saying, hey, I had this happen in Michigan, I had this happen in Minnesota. And I started interacting with people, and then I started having people call me, and I was hearing like these wild stories that really blew my mind. And I thought, I have to document this. Like, nobody's going to believe me, like the things that I heard. So I started recording them just for research purposes and posting them up on YouTube, and then it kind of unfolded there. But the channel didn't come along till after these next set of experiences. But I'm gonna go back in time a little bit, and I'm working at a meat processing plant. Not exactly the position that I want to have in life, and I'm trying to get out there and just enjoy nature and do some bow hunting. So the owner of the meat processing plant would talk to me about bow hunting, and we talked about some really good spots. So I said, hey, I'm wanting to get into bow hunting. Do you know any good areas? Like, I'm not really sure how public land works, but I want to get out there and set up a stand and see if I can put down a deer. He said, oh yeah, there's this spot off the Merrimack River. If you go there, I guarantee you'll see 30 deer in one night. So he told me where this spot was. He wrote down the directions on a napkin. He's like, do you know where this is? Do you know where this road is? I had no idea, but I was just like, Yeah. And after work that day, it was a Friday. It was 2018, September 14th. I remember that because it was the day before opening bow season. But I got out there at the end of this Forest Service road. It just dead ends, and it's on the backside of a conservation area. Not a lot of people know about it, but I parked on top of a cliff, and you can see the entire Merrimack River and the conservation area. It was a really cool spot. But when I turned around and walked back towards my vehicle, I saw this creature on all fours, and it ran like this on all fours. It looked like a chimpanzee moving through the woods, and I thought, oh man, that has to be a black bear. But then it got behind a really large oak tree, and it slowly hid behind the tree like this. All I saw was like a big black hairy arm. So I thought to myself, that has to be a very intelligent black bear to know to slowly hide behind a tree. And I stared at that tree for a little bit, and it never like peeked back out. I never saw it like leave or take off running. Everything just got dead quiet. So that happened, and I just wrote it off as a black bear. I went back the next morning, early that morning, to bow hunt, and I just sat there in my car. I had this horrible feeling of dread, like, why do I feel like this? And I was sitting there thinking, like, something feels off. So I didn't bow hunt that morning. I just thought to myself, well, if that is a black bear, you're gonna go into the woods when it's still dark out, and you might confront this thing. You better not go. So I didn't. But the next encounter after that, this was 3 weeks after I seen the jet black Sasquatch with the white stripes. Sorry, I'm not keeping everything in order. I just had to make sure I mentioned that. That story at the Merrimack off of the cliff, that's important for this next encounter that I'm about to tell you guys. So it was 3 weeks after I seen the jet black Sasquatch with the white stripes, and I just went out there nonstop. I'd find myself going through the forest all the time looking for any sign that I possibly could. And like I told you earlier, it seemed like the more I started looking, the less I found. The more I took my camera out there, the less activity took place. And I knew they were out there, but I was having a hard time wrapping my mind around what I encountered, because the logical side of my brain would tell me, you didn't see that, Miguel. And then the part that makes me would say, yeah, you did. And I always compare it like to somebody who like was out drinking and got in an accident, and they wake up the next day sober. They're like, oh, I didn't wreck my car. And they have to remind themselves like, yeah, you did. Or when a family member passes away, you tell yourself that didn't happen, and you have to remind yourself, yeah, that did. You know, this person actually died. And it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around that. That's kind of how it was with this Bigfoot encounter, because my brain just didn't have a place to file that encounter. It just kept trying to reject it. And it's hard to describe, but I went out there because I knew what I had seen, but I was trying to figure it out, and I couldn't. And it was about 3 weeks after that encounter. The jet black Sasquatch with the white stripes, that happened in June. This next encounter took place in July, and it was in 2019. So I'm not giving up, but on this day, I received some news that really ticked me off. So I got mad, I left my phone, my cell phone, and I just went out for a walk because, like I said, I was like at the lowest point in my life, and hearing that bad news just kind of, I don't know, triggered me. So I went out for a walk because walking out in nature definitely cures everything. But I got at the top of the driveway, and when I was making my way around, I was walking really slow. Like, I would take like a few steps, stop and observe. For some reason, I developed like this type of OCD when I was looking for Sasquatch, because I was trying not to step like on a stick or on a rock. I was just trying to be as stealthy as possible every time I went out there. But I did my regular routine, and I was doing that, and then I wasn't paying attention, and I stepped on this rock, and it made this skidding sound across the gravel, like and then when that happened, I saw this jet black creature on all fours scurry like this. Actually, it happened on my left, so it went from right to left. But anyways, it scurried right in front of me, and I couldn't tell what it was. My mind was instantly telling me that's got to be like a group of turkeys moving through the forest. Maybe it's hogs, maybe it's a black bear. And then it hit me. This is the same thing that I'd seen by the Merrimack, scurry on all fours and hide behind a tree. The thing that I thought was an intelligent black bear, it did that same exact motion. And I'm staring at this tree and it slowly hides behind the tree just like this in slow motion. So I'm thinking this is the same thing that I've seen at the Merrimack. And whatever it is, it's gone. It hid behind the tree. I'm never going to see it again. And I'm just staring at that oak tree. And as soon as I think that, this little juvenile Sasquatch pops out from behind the tree. So I'm standing right here and he's quartering to my left and he's looking that way and I'm over here. So he has no idea that I'm there. So I'm sitting there and I'm just observing this creature. It was the coolest thing that I've ever seen. He was probably about 4.5 to maybe 5.5 feet tall. And he was really robust, almost like a beer keg. Like, I don't know. It's really hard to describe his body shape, but he was jet black. I mean, this thing was solid black, and it had this shine to it. Like when the sunlight hit the creature, it had like this chrome look to it. And time went in slow motion when I was staring at this creature. When the wind blew, you could see like every hair follicle moving, almost like if it had like a blow dryer on low on its hair. Like I was that close to the creature. So this creature had a very unusual look to it. It had a conical shaped head, but typically with Bigfoot reports, you hear that it just had like this crest at the top. It came to a point. No, this thing from the brow ridge up, it went up to about 1.5 feet, maybe even more. And it came to a point at the very top. It was almost shaped like a football, but much larger. And I found myself scanning its head, almost like when you're in the big city and you're underneath the big skyscrapers, like you find your eyes like scanning them. It was like that. I don't know how to explain it, but the hair kind of tapered up as it went up its head, and the hair at the very top was kind of matted. But this thing had a very clean coat of hair, fur, whatever you want to call it. And it looked like it bathed in the river and used like conditioner. It was so clean. But this thing was like a handsome little guy. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't like nasty looking or evil. It was the cutest thing you've ever seen. Almost like if you see like a fawn deer running around its mother, like it's cute. Or if you see like a baby Siberian husky, it's just cute looking. That's what this thing was. And its eyes, it wasn't anything like the Sasquatch I had seen 3 weeks prior to that. Instead of having like almond jet black eyes, this thing had round eyes, and they're about the diameter of a Coke can, and you could see almost all of it was white, like a light bulb. It had like this glossy light bulb look to it. In the very center, it had like black. But he had very long, thin lips. You couldn't see the nose because his entire face was covered with hair. It almost reminded me of Pac-Man, like the creatures that are chasing around Pac-Man. You see like big white eyes. It was like that. And he had 2 canines sticking from the top down, resting on his bottom lip. And they were dental white, similar to like German Shepherds. They have like dental white teeth for some reason. And he was like extremely chill. He was just sitting there like this. And he slowly panned to his right. And when he saw me, it was like he saw the devil. He was freaked out. Like he was in shock. Like, oh my God, it's a human. His eyes went like this, like they almost bulged out of his head. And he went from panic mode to time to get serious mode. So like you could tell he got like this serious look on his face. And then he like puffed up his chest like this and ducked down. But let's say this is the tree and this is the juvenile. He puffed up like this and disappeared like that. It was almost like a fish spooking in the water. It was lightning fast. It was like Flash the superhero. Boom, just gone. I don't know if that was like something supernatural or speed, but when he hid behind that tree, there was like this little branch next to the tree and it was swaying back and forth because he hit it when he ducked behind the tree. And everything got dead quiet. I'm just standing there and I remember saying, hey buddy, I was just trying to like talk to it. I didn't know what to do, but I got this overwhelming feeling like, oh man, if there's a little one, mom and dad are around. And I did not pursue it because after seeing the second one, I knew without a doubt that these creatures exist. It was really cool. And I kept saying that too. Like my mind was blown away. I kept saying that was so cool. I kept saying, oh my God. And I remember saying, my God, they are real, which really hit me hard because later on I watched this interview with Bob Gimlin and he said when he saw Patty, he said, my God, they are real. I said, oh. He said the same words that I did. And I don't know, for some reason that really hit me hard. And I know that he's telling the truth. You hear these conspiracies about like the Patty footage and all these other stories. No, that guy saw what he saw, and he's being an honest person. Like, I mean, I can tell because everything he said, his demeanor, and what he filmed, it speaks for itself. But anyways, after that, that's when I started Sasquatch Theory and made it concrete for me. And I have another major experience that happened if you want to hear about it. Okay, this is kind of important. So I went back to the spot where I had seen the little juvenile Sasquatch the next day, and I kind of looked around that oak tree. I didn't find any tracks, any sign that there was something there. But I looked in the dirt and there was this rock sticking halfway out of the dirt. So I pulled it up and I'm like, is that an arrowhead? No. Is it? Oh, yes, it is. And it's this giant arrowhead. People call it a Clovis, but I mean, it was perfect. And for some reason, I feel like there's a connection there because I had never found an arrowhead on that property. I grew up there, and that Clovis was just, it shouldn't have been there. I feel like there was a connection there because I would hear rock clacks on the property. It almost sounds like they're flint knapping. I'm not saying they are making arrowheads, but that's what it sounds like. And I just thought it was weird that that same tree where the juvenile hid behind is where I found a Clovis. And I posted a photo of the Clovis on Facebook, and somebody immediately offered me $500 for it. I did research on it, and supposedly it's like from the Ice Age. It's older than Jesus, and it's like in perfect shape. It's huge. But right there where the juvenile was is a game trail. That's where we'd always see the deer hopping across the road, the turkeys would cross. So it was definitely following like a game trail. I feel like that's significant. But that happened in the summertime, and then I had some strange experiences. I went actually to this conservation area that we're at now. I got in there, I was hunting, and my back was out, like I told you before, so I could not get up in a tree. Like, I just could not do it. So I was like, ooh, I'm gonna set up a chair next to this food plot, and I'm just gonna bow hunt like that. That's the best I can do. So I'm sitting there pretty much all day. I don't hear too much, I don't see too much, and I can't take it. Like, my back hurts so bad. So I get out of that chair and I'm just laying on my back, just trying to get some relief. And then finally I started feeling better. I sit in the chair, and then I start hearing what sounds like two woodpeckers knocking on trees, just like a Morse code, like tap, 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 tap. This happened for several hours. I'm like, it's definitely woodpeckers. I'm not seeing any woodpeckers, but that's what it sounds like. And it's starting to get dark, and I think to myself, that's unusual because woodpeckers don't stick around that long. They were there for hours. And as soon as I think that, whatever it is smacks a tree, like wood on wood, and you could tell like whatever it used to hit the tree just like broke. And that's when it got my attention. And at this point it's getting dark. A doe comes out in front of me, and she sees me and she takes off running. And then two does come up behind me, and it's almost like they're running from something. I'm like, what is going on? And then I hear this super loud wood knock way down in the valley. It sounded like Mark McGuire hit one out of the park. And it was definitely a wood knock. Like, there's no mistaking it. There's no people around, especially this time of year. I never see hunters in this area either. I'm always the only one in that parking lot. But then something happened that really sent chills down my spine. The trail that I walked in on, one did a wood knock super loud. So I have to walk in the pitch black through that trail to get back to my vehicle. And I did it, nothing happened. They didn't follow me, but I had some serious wood knocking happening there. And later on after that, I went back to that spot to investigate just to see what I'd find, and I found these awesome tree structures. I found perfectly symmetrical X's, arches, and they were all over in this pine thicket, and it was just the coolest thing ever. I consider it sign. Many people say it's not sign, but I definitely feel like it's Sasquatch sign. What are the odds that you have Sasquatch activity in an area and then you go there and you find tree structures? To me, 2 + 2 = 4. But other people, obviously, they think it's wind damage, which I respect their opinions. But the next major encounter that happened was that fall. I'm sitting in my house. I'm still going through a hard time. I got the window open. I was a cigarette smoker at that time, so I had like my hand out the window, and it was pretty cold that night. But I started hearing this commotion in the woods, and it sounded like a chimpanzee being ripped apart, just like something was wrong. And I shine my spotlight out the window, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. The whole time this thing's just screaming, definitely like an animal in distress call. That's the best I can say. And as I'm shining my light, I see this fox come out of the woods through the tall grass. He went through the center of the yard and back into the woods. This property is surrounded by woods, 360. And the whole time, whatever that is, it's vocalizing like it's in pain, it's in distress. And then a second fox comes out of the woods, through the tall grass, through the yard, and goes back into the woods. And then a third fox comes out, but he's really low to the ground, like crawling through the yard. Something's like after these foxes, and I'm not really sure what's still in the woods, because whatever that is still vocalizing. And all of a sudden I hear this big commotion, and I'm like, ooh, that's got to be deer, because sometimes deer are attracted to like distress sounds. Like if a fawn's in trouble, they'll all come rushing. That's what I thought it was. And I shine the spotlight in that direction, and I see like anywhere from like 6 to 9 sets of eyes, and they're all about 3 or 4 feet off the ground, and they're bobbing up and down like this. So I'm trying to figure out what it is, but the spotlight will only penetrate the very edge of the woods. You can't see into the woods. So all I see is like these yellowish green eyes doing this. And I'm thinking that's definitely got to be deer, because they're pretty low to the ground. It's not Sasquatch. And this is a scary thing. I don't know if this is like a mind speak situation or just some type of supernatural coincidence, but as soon as I think it can't be Sasquatch, it has to be deer, one of the sets of eyes rises up like an elevator to about, I don't want to exaggerate, but it was higher than a basketball hoop. It had to have been like 13 to 14 feet tall. And I could not believe that whatever that thing is that tall, because the Sasquatch that I've seen prior to that, they were only like anywhere from 6 to 8 foot tall. This thing was a giant. Like, you always hear people say, oh, they're not that big in the lower 48. They only get that big in Alaska. No, this thing was a giant. And it scared me so bad. And all of a sudden, it was like the movie Jaws. Like all of a sudden, you know, that feeling of dun-dun, dun-dun started happening, because you could hear something in the woods where I originally heard that sound like a chimpanzee being torn apart. The sets of eyes are over here, and then from over this direction, I hear and it's getting closer and closer and closer, and I think to myself, something big is coming. And I brace myself. So this creature is approaching the area where the foxes were vocalizing at. That's what I'm thinking the distress call was. It was a fox in distress. But I keep hearing it, and it's getting closer and closer. So I take my attention off of the sets of eyes that I'm looking at, because I just can't see what it is. So I shine my spotlight over here. There's this gap in the woods, and I just put it on that gap, and I'm just waiting for this thing to walk across there. This Sasquatch, it was a whitish gray Sasquatch, had a round head, big shoulders, the black almond shaped eyes. He walked through that gap, and I had my spotlight on him. I saw him clear as day. He never looked over at me. It didn't look like the spotlight was like causing like a glare in his eyes or anything. Like, it didn't bother him. He was just focused on that other group of Sasquatch, and he walked over there and met up with them, and I slammed that window shut. And that terrified me. Where he came from, though, is where that jet black Sasquatch with the white stripes went. He went towards that creek bottom. He came out of that creek bottom. And this creek bottom pours into the Merrimack River, which you guys are here now. And like I said earlier, there's been a ton of BFRO reports from the Merrimack River. So they're certainly following the waterways. I feel like they came from an area like this to that private land property, and that's why I was experiencing activity. But one thing I found to be unusual was every time that I was out there, way off in the distance in the deep, deep woods, I could hear somebody chainsawing. And this happened for about a year. Every day they were chainsawing. I think they were like making like cattle fields or doing something, but I feel like they pushed those creatures onto the property where I was living at. There are things that happened during that time frame of the encounter sightings that I just didn't know what to make of. For example, one day there was this doe. She would come out into the yard and her front leg was broken. she'd just stand there looking at me. And this happened several times. I'm like, why is she not afraid of me? And her front leg was just dangling there. I felt so bad for her. And she'd look back into the woods, and then she'd look at me. She'd continue doing that, and I didn't think much of it. I thought, oh, there's got to be coyotes after her. But after interviewing a guy named David down south in Missouri in the Ozarks, he said, all my deer, they're dying. Something's killing the deer. They would break their necks, twist them around like a Twizzler, and they'd break their front legs. And he had trail cam footage of them. He'd have these giant bucks, and their front leg would just be dangling there. And I've heard that from other people who have told their stories throughout the years, that they'll start off by breaking the front leg, and then they'll come in and finish the job by breaking their necks. But I didn't think anything of that when I experienced it. But when I heard his story, I was like a light bulb went off in my head. Yes, that was happening. Starting the channel Sasquatch Theory has really vindicated these encounters that I've had happen in the past, and I definitely feel validated hearing other people's experiences, and it's helped me process the encounters and experiences that have taken place in central Missouri. It definitely validates what I've experienced. It's been sort of a therapy for me, because I feel vindicated when I speak to somebody who's having experiences, because it's just too often when you speak to someone about Bigfoot, or they hear about your channel and they're like, how many Bigfoot have you seen today? And it kind of ticks you off. But when you speak to people that have actually seen these things and have had them on their property, it really, I don't know, it has like this healing effect to it, because you're not alone, and you know there's others out there just like you. Do you guys want to hear about the time I heard Dogman? This was actually one of my first experiences, and I forgot to mention it for some reason, but this experience terrified me, and it has scared me to this day. I think about it when I'm doing Sasquatch research. The sound that I heard still haunts me to this very day. But basically, it was summertime. I was probably about 11 or 12 years old. Same property where I had all the Sasquatch encounters and experiences later on. But I'm sitting there, I got the window open, because back then we didn't really use AC as much, and we just used like box fans. And I remember sitting there watching Family Guy on Cartoon Network. It was pretty late at night. And all of a sudden I heard this werewolf howl in the forest. And it was so deep, so demonic, so guttural, and it lasted like 8 seconds, just this ooh, but it was so loud it sounded like concert speakers, like a huge PA system. And like I said, it lasted like 8 seconds, the werewolf howl, and then something screamed like a woman being tortured. That same scream that I heard off the river, just a it was horrifying. I mean, when I think about it, like, I'd choke up. But I slammed that window shut, and I crawled up into my bed, and I got under the covers. And I thought, maybe my brother's out there playing a prank on me. How would he get a PA system? Why would he do that? All these questions were going through my mind, but I could never figure out what that was until later on. I had Bigfoot encounters, and I started hearing about Dogman, and I was like, wait a minute. But I know that what I heard that night was no known animal, is not a coyote, not a wolf, like nothing that should be out there. It was demonic. It was something straight out of hell, and it scares me still to this day. When I'm out there doing Bigfoot research, I don't think about those sightings that I had with Sasquatch. I think about that thing that I heard, because I know that thing's out there too. Here's another encounter, and I know I got a lot of encounters. It doesn't sound believable, but this truly happened. Okay, so I continued doing research on the property. This was probably about a year after my sightings, and I was determined to like get these things on film or just figure out more. And instead of walking around the woods aimlessly, like all over the place, I figured I'm just gonna sit in a chair and let them come up to me. So I started doing that, and this went on for about 2 or 3 weeks. I'd just sit in this chair and just listen, and I would hear things. Like, I would hear that thump, I would hear strange vocalizations. And one morning I heard something that was probably about 80 or 90 yards off, and I was hearing it prior to that. It just sounded like a little twig snapped. At this point, I'm super paranoid. Anything that happens, like, I look, because I know what's out there. And I kept hearing that. And I thought maybe it's a squirrel just like on the forest floor. Maybe it's like a robin bouncing around the forest floor. I don't know, but I'm gonna check it out. And I made this trail prior to that with the leaf blower. I blew all the leaves and made a trail through the forest. And I had not used that trail until this day. And I started walking down that trail, and I would do my usual take 2 to 3 steps, stop for about 5 minutes, look around, listen, take a few more steps, and repeat. And when I got down that ridge at the end of the trail, I heard something that sounded like a huge mature buck in the rut, but this was in the summertime, just a like a deep grunt. So I was thinking maybe it's a bear. And when I looked over to my right, I see this brown creature, probably about, I would say about 5 feet tall, give or take. And he blows kind of like how deer blow. Like you can see like steam coming out of their nose when it's early in the morning. It's still cool. You could see like steam blow like this. And he like vanished into thin air. I always describe it like somebody picked up sand and threw it in the wind, and he just like poof, disappeared. And I wonder, was that supernatural or was that speed? And as soon as that happened, to my left on the other side of the trail, something did rapid wood knocks, just pow, 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 pow. Loud wood knocks, like something set the alarm, like human, there's a human here. And yeah, it was just unusual. I don't know. I don't know if that was supernatural or speed, but I think back to the moment where I'd seen those 2 orange orbs floating through the woods, and I believe it's supernatural for sure. I definitely do. I just hope to gather more data in the future and try to help out like-minded people who are having these experiences. I'm not a Sasquatch exterminator. I'm not out there to get rid of them, but I would like to help people with how to handle these things if they're experiencing them. And I want to help validate other people and make them feel some sort of comfort. If all I can do is just let somebody know that they exist, then I've done my job. But as far as like setting up motion lights and trail cameras to scare them off, that's not me. Like I'm out there trying to find answers as far as like what the structures mean. How can I find tracks? Where can I find an active location where these things are daytime active? They're coming up to people's properties, looking into the windows, slapping the side of the house, like ongoing activity. That's what I'm trying to look for. And I have nothing to prove to people. I just think it would be super cool to have some footage of a Sasquatch. I mean, why not?